I love playing video games. I don't care where, when, what genre, what style, who with, single player or multiplayer. It doesn't matter to me, I love them all. And even if I get less and less time to play them as I get older, I will never stop enjoying the time that I do spend with them. But in the last few years, I've probably played less new games than I ever have before. They just haven't been able to scratch the itch like they used to, and it took me a while to figure out why. At first I thought I was just getting older, more pessimistic, that there are things that bother me about games now that I might have overlooked as a kid. Or maybe with the number of fantastic games that I've played over the years, maybe I just have higher standards now. But the truth is, it has nothing to do with me. I keep saying that I'm going to play all these other games that I haven't gotten around to yet, and yet every time my girlfriend sticks her head in my room to see if I'm actually doing that, it's always the same story.
What are you doing?
Huh?
What are you doing?
This is my problem. Despite currently being in a golden era of video game releases, I just can't seem to move on from one game in particular. It's just that nothing's quite been the same since Elden Ring. I reckon it's unusual for a lot of gamers to have a certain world they like to revisit. For me, Elden Ring has been on my hard drive for 3.5 years, and no game I've ever played keeps reeling me back to it quite like this one does. And on my most recent revisit back to it, I really started to think about why? Why is it that I have this whole back catalogue of games that I still need to play, including the other Souls games by the way, but yet they continue to collect dust while I return to Elden Ring over and over and over again? So on my last playthrough, I played with the intent to get to the bottom of what makes the game so special. What is it about this game in particular that has managed to bury itself so deep into my brain? And I realized that it isn't anything in particular. I still don't really have an answer. I can't put my finger on exactly what it does so well, because I don't think Elden Ring does any one thing leagues better than any of its contemporaries, and yet somehow the game as a whole still is. So rather than coming up with some objective analytical breakdown video that honestly plenty of others have done before me, I instead want to work through what parts of the game stood out to me on my last playthrough and retrace my steps through my experience with the game as a whole. And I'm hoping by doing that, maybe I can finally understand why Elden Ring has sunk its hooks in so deeply to me. Before Elden Ring, I had never played any of the Souls games, just because, if I'm being completely honest, they really did not appeal to me. And can you really blame me? The reputation of these games is that they are notoriously unforgiving and difficult, designed specifically to test your mental stamina. And geez, the way people talk about these games.
I love the pain.
The intensity it takes to really enjoy and get the most out of these games can be kind of intimidating to a lot of new players. So you can understand, from the outside looking in on the series, being pitched on a game's brutal punishment just wasn't something I found that alluring. But in 2022, when the reviews for Elden Ring came rolling in, I finally decided to give From Software a chance to win me over. I figured I've played games. I'm not opposed to cranking the difficulty every once in a while. How hard could it be? And I hated it.
I just can't do it.
I can't put my finger on exactly what it was I disliked about it so much, but I just couldn't connect with it, on account of it being so different than anything else I'd played. I felt oddly loose and weightless during combat in a way that I didn't with other games, because despite From Software's design being massively influential on the industry at large, it still maintains a distinct feeling and style that is wholly unique from anything else.
Fucking bullshit! How is he fucking hitting the dodge button? He's a fucking AI.
In other words, I had never felt so shit at a video game that I expected to be better at. And on top of feeling like a fish out of water with the combat, I also found that Elden Ring's open world design was actually more demoralizing than I would have found with a more linear experience like Dark Souls, which I know is the exact opposite of the prevailing sentiment in the community. But for me, instead of feeling like I could just go do something else when a boss halted my progress, I instead felt like it didn't matter where I went or what I did, I still sucked. because of the open world design, I never felt the game really pressuring me all that much to persevere through a tough boss when the option was always there to just leave and level up somewhere else. Which kind of meant I kept robbing myself of the opportunity to get better and actually overcome the frustration that I was persistently feeling. After everything I had heard about From Software, I was so disappointed that it didn't grab me like I wanted it to. So after a few hours of wandering through the lands between, I put the game down. I forget exactly why I picked it back up, but it was sometime after some people started calling it one of the greatest games of all time that I decided to give it another chance. I figured with all the adoration that the game was receiving, it was definitely me who was missing something, not the game. Some way, somehow, I knew it was my fault that I didn't love it. And so if I was going to, this is the mindset I was going to adopt. In Australia, we have a saying, we're not here to fuck spiders. There's actually a few versions of that, but it just means we're not here to mess around or do anything that isn't exactly the task at hand. I was not gonna back down. I was not gonna give up against any boss, no matter what. And keep in mind, given I still very much sucked at the game, this was probably a horrible mindset to adopt so religiously, but there I went anyway, and I started a new game with this newfound conviction. And while I couldn't really do anything about the Grafted Scion, since it doesn't let you attempt it more than once, the Tree Sentinel, oh, I could take that. Now, I understand and understood at the time that the Tree Sentinel is not a boss you are really supposed to beat so early in the game, and me attempting it is a bit like a Jack Russell nipping at the hooves of a horse. The Tree Sentinel's placement here is specifically to teach the player that not every boss you encounter is one you are going to be prepared for at that moment, that it's okay to walk away and come back when you're actually ready. In this instance, especially if you are a beginner like me, you are supposed to walk away. But no, I, a player who died multiple times to the Soldier of Godric, would not leave this ditch until I did the impossible. After the first 20 or 30 deaths in a row, I lost count. It felt like a completely insurmountable challenge, but it was nonetheless a challenge I had started, and in my mind, it doesn't beat me when it kills me. It only beats me if I quit. So for several exhausting, demoralizing hours, I grinded this boss, honing what little skills I had in a boss fight I had absolutely no business being in. But slowly, I started to get better. The first thing I learned was not to panic. I learned which attacks I could and couldn't dodge through, and when my openings were to attack myself. How many swings I could safely wail on it before I even, by complete accident, learnt this little maneuver I could use to give myself more openings. And ever so gradually, I began putting the pieces together of what I had learnt, and with each attempt, whittling his health down just a little bit further and further and further, until finally, I did it. Words don't describe the feeling of relief, disbelief, and accomplishment I felt in that final blow. I can't even guess how many times I faced the Tree Sentinel, but it was only in that last handful did winning the fight even feel doable. Throughout the countless thousands of hours I have spent playing video games in my life, I can't think of a single moment within any of them that was more personally meaningful to me. It was in that moment that From Software won me over, and I was absolutely in love with Elden Ring. And the best part of it all was that I had barely even started. In that first playthrough, I was so enamored by everything the game was doing so well that it kind of just washed over me in a way that I didn't really consciously notice or think about. I was just too busy having too much fun. I just knew it was good, and I didn't really have the words to describe how. If you were to try and explain to someone who's never played games before why you love Red Dead Redemption 2, you'd probably say it has a gripping story with incredible characters and writing and an absolutely gorgeous open world that you can get lost in for hours. Most titles have an easy elevator pitch like that, but with Elden Ring, you know what I mean? Like, what I was loving about it was far more abstract and personal than what other games bring to the table. It's not what the game was doing that made me feel a certain way, it's what I was doing in the game that made me feel a certain way. And that's kind of harder to articulate. But that hasn't stopped me from really wondering what that elevator pitch would be. And yes, this is going to be a long fucking elevator ride. But it's been long enough for me now, and I've thought about it enough that I think I've figured it out. I think there's 7 main reasons that I and so many others have fallen so deeply in love with this particular experience. And it all starts right here. That first fight with the Tree Sentinel taught me everything I need to know about Elden Ring and From Software games in general. No matter how bullshit, absurd, or unfair a fight might feel, it is always possible. If I was patient enough, I could overcome anything. That's the lesson I learned from that fight, that I needed to focus far more on improving myself rather than my stats and abilities. Get good, which famously can be a punishing design philosophy that really risks turning some players away. But for the ones who stay and persevere all the way through Margit, Godric, Radahn, Renala, Rykard, Mohg, Morgott, Malekith, Godfrey, Radagon, Elden Beast, Malenia, there's nothing else in gaming quite like it for me, other than maybe Ogdo Bogdo. But it's the fact that I can rattle off those names and you have likely a distinct visceral memory of facing each one of them along with countless others. I just think that speaks to how special Elden Ring's challenge is, and it made me understand why the community is the way that it is. Shared triumph. And I know that a bunch of random people waffling away about builds and bosses in a Reddit thread, that seems like an element of the experience that's removed from the game itself, but it's kind of not. Constantly seeing the phantoms of other players navigating the path alongside me, or the helpful or not so helpful messages they litter around the world, that brings it to life in such an interesting way that in this single player game, I never really feel like I'm playing it by myself. Walking into a boss arena and seeing it absolutely soaked in the bloodstains of my fallen brothers and sisters, that is always a chilling, intimidating sight that I feel unprepared for the beatdown I'm about to receive. But every time, seeing those bloodstains, it kind of makes me want to rise to avenge them, because these people clearly didn't quit, so neither would I. The thing is though, everything I've said about the game so far isn't all that unique to Elden Ring. Most of this stuff is baked into From Software's DNA, and plenty of those ideas have seeped into the industry at large as well. What makes Elden Ring different though, is how it takes From Software's very specific but brilliant existing formula and grafts it to some of the industry's most successful ideas. And the first and easily the most obvious one is the open world. And not this open world, but this one. Elden Ring being influenced by Breath of the Wild is pretty well documented at this point, but I think so much so, and with how obvious that influence is, that it is kind of hard to talk about Elden Ring at all without at least giving Zelda a nod. Breath of the Wild and subsequently Elden Ring heavily leans into the idea that you should always look under the stairs. I forget exactly where I first heard the phrase, but it just refers to the practice of checking underneath the staircase you just walk down, because the developers will usually hide some sort of useful or valuable item, despite the design of the level clearly coaxing the player to continue moving past it. It's a way of encouraging exploration by tucking value into places that players might otherwise overlook, effectively rewarding players for their own natural curiosity. In an open world game like Elden Ring or Breath of the Wild, looking under the stairs is far less specific than actually looking under a staircase. The game doesn't outright tell you where you are supposed to go, so actually progressing necessitates that you navigate your own path through the open world to a certain extent, and only really relies on discrete visual cues and clever framing to nudge you in the right direction. And because of that design, you are basically forced to engage with and explore the environment a lot more actively than you would in a game like Assassin's Creed. So with your eyes already on the horizon, it's pretty much inevitable that you'll see something that's worth investigating that's clearly unrelated to the main objective. And the beauty of how these games are designed is that you're never more than like a minute away from actually finding something interesting. And that's just it. Finding. Like actually finding. Because there's next to no hand-holding, no map markers or waypoints, it makes the stuff that you do find, whether that be dungeons, bosses, or other useful items, they feel like genuine discoveries. questions, because nothing other than your natural curiosity led you to find them. This obviously means that an absolutely enormous amount of the content will be missed in the process, but the risk of not finding something is what makes finding something actually special. The game's most famous example of this being the Schiefer Riverwell in Mistwood, a relatively unassuming building that's still conspicuous enough amongst its surrounding environment that it's worth investigating anyway. And yet at the bottom of it is this. The sheer idea that I could have completely missed this had I not noticed this boring building makes it feel like a truly miraculous discovery. And it made me wonder, what else is the game hiding? What else is it not telling me? This looking under the stairs concept obviously isn't just unique to open world games like Elden Ring and Breath of the Wild. Most notably, I think it might be best used in survival horror, where you often have to decide between progressing to safety or risking further anxiety to look around for items that might help you in the next area, adding a thick risk-reward factor to exploration. But unlike Breath of the Wild, Elden Ring implements this version of the concept as well, with From Software's classic soul retrieval mechanic. The risk of dying too far off the beaten track can result in your runes getting stuck in some tough to reach places, or guarded by a battalion of very annoying enemies. But risky exploration is still often worth the effort, and sometimes it's not. This whole explorative part of the game is still such a perfect, serene counterweight to the high-stress component of Elden Ring's boss encounters. And while it might not be the most exciting part of the game, it is easily the part you get the most lost in because the world building is outstanding. Elden Ring is cut from a lot of the same cloth as Bethesda's Elder Scrolls and Fallout. Yeah, look, I know, just stay with me for a second. For all of Bethesda's jank and bugs, their worlds still feel incredibly immersive and atmospheric because they feel so lived in, with most of the story and lore being told through the environment. Whenever you stumble into a crumbling ruin or abandoned family home, you still feel like you've stumbled onto a story that was there long before you ever arrived. These games really feel like and sell the idea that they are worlds that exist without you in it. It's the whole reason it works, that they're more than just a playground that's built for the player to explore. And that immersion into the world is why you can just waste hours away wandering through it. Now, Elden Ring taps into much of the same concept, but it covers it with FromSoft's more cryptic coat of paint. And here's the thing, I'll be completely honest, I don't really care about the lore. I know that these people are all related and that this lady is like sick or something and mean. But I'm not one of these people using item descriptions to piece together an entire timeline. And if you're into that, that's fine. I'm not here to judge. Some people collect stamps, others like to read stuff in the video games they play. That's just not why I'm here. But personally for me, I don't feel like I need to have all the answers for everything in the environment for me to still be incredibly intrigued by it. Because even without getting really stuck into the lore, it's still so evident that it's there, adding this dense layer of genuine authenticity and consistency to the world that is just dripping with atmosphere as a result. I mean, look at this. I feel like I'm in a painting. This is going to be a really quick point despite it being really no less important than the other ones, but notice the aesthetic diversity on display here. Limgrave, Caelid, Liurnia, Altus, the mountaintops, even smaller areas like Nokron and the Halig Tree, each one feels so completely different, and that kind of variety makes it sort of easier to mentally organize. So each chapter of the game as you progress through it is made far more memorable than it would have been if it had taken place in a more uniform setting. And again, designing a massive open world with this philosophy isn't an unusual practice in gaming, and likely another thing that Miyazaki has partly adapted from Breath of the Wild. But I feel the visual variety is stepped up here in a way that makes those first steps into these environments feel just as exhilarating as beating the boss at the end of them. They are simply jaw-dropping. A game's soundtrack is something I think that often goes underappreciated when considering the replayability of certain games. Skyrim, Breath of the Wild, Red Dead Redemption, The Last of Us, Minecraft, even shooters like Battlefield and Halo, we tend to talk about these games' greatest strengths being within the gameplay. And obviously, yeah, Duh. But every single one of them has absolutely banging soundtracks that play a monumental role in how we remember and think about being in those worlds. Elden Ring is no different in this regard. The music and sound design are incredible, but it is somewhat unique in that it isn't as memorably iconic as those other soundtracks are, and I don't think it's meant to be. Soundtracks typically fall under the category of non-diegetic sound, which just refers to sound that doesn't actually exist within the world. Like Batman can't hear his own theme. There are some exceptions where the soundtracks are diegetic, like previously mentioned in Fallout, where it's tied to an in-game radio station that the characters listen to, but Elden Ring does something really interesting where it kind of blends the two together. It is still a non-diegetic soundtrack, but if you listen to it on Apple Music or Spotify, it doesn't land quite the same way as those other ones do because, well, you sort of just have to be there. It's a soundtrack that strangely seems to emanate from the landscape in front of you. And I'm not talking about ambient sounds from the environment like birds or trees. It is still music that you're listening to, but it somehow gives the impression that that music is what you might hear if you were actually standing there. It's a really weird, almost hypnotic effect. But as a result, I can't think of another soundtrack that's made me feel more engrossed, more immersed in a game's world than the one in this game. So far in talking about the things that Elden Ring does so well, we've discussed the difficulty and the community that has built around that, the sense of exploration and discovery, the world building and atmosphere, the stunning visual and aesthetic variety, and the unbelievable music and sound design. But here's the thing, all of that is just the stage. And it would mean a lot less if that stage felt the same every time you replayed it. But what makes it feel different, what makes it endlessly replayable, is how much of your experience changes based on how you decide to approach it, right from the very beginning. Your experience with Elden Ring each time you play it is so dependent on the build you commit to making because the stats, weapons, spells, even basic playstyles are so varied that you're not just rerunning the same game again, you're essentially playing a new one. Bosses you might have been thrashed by the first time are now an absolute cakewalk, and others you previously trivialized are now a brick wall. This shift in exactly where you face the most challenge often changes how you approach the game altogether. It might result in you fighting bosses not just in a completely different way, but also maybe even a completely different order. It might mean that you spend more time in certain areas that you didn't previously, or take a different route through the lands between entirely. All of this gives you a chance to find new weapons, armor, spells, quests, bosses, or even new areas entirely. This is the main reason why returning to Elden Ring is so uniquely rewarding and exciting every time, and why no matter how many times I come back to it, it just never gets stale. Most of the time for me, my allure back to a certain game comes from just one or two elements in it that I found particularly memorable. But in Elden Ring, most of my allure back to it comes specifically from the experiences I feel I haven't had yet. It's how I don't know how all of these elements are going to come together for me on my next playthrough. And it isn't just that they all feed into each other in a way that makes Elden Ring greater than just the sum of them together, but also how those elements seem to rearrange themselves in how I perceive and remember them each time I go back. It's how the game always stays so fresh and why it's just so fucking addictive. Which kind of brings me all the way back to the main question that I keep circling around. Why can't I move on? There's so many new and old games out there that I still haven't played that I'm sure I would absolutely love. And as I said earlier, Elden Ring doesn't do any one thing that much better than anything else. There's a number of games out there that do any one of these things just as well or even better. But none of them do all of these things at once quite as well as Elden Ring does. For me, it's this perfect blend of everything I've ever loved about games, distilled into one complete experience. And that's why I keep returning to it. Whenever I need any of these itches scratched, why would I go anywhere other than the lands between? However, you'd think after 3 years, I'd have exhausted everything the game has to offer. Every nook, every cranny, every cave, catacomb, build, and boss, but I haven't. In fact, there's a pretty massive thing I haven't done yet, and frankly, I'm kind of embarrassed to be making an Elden Ring video without having this one very important credential. I mentioned before that a boss doesn't beat you when it kills you, it only beats you if you quit. Malenia, Blade of Miquella, is the only boss who beat me. And I know that Malenia is supposedly not just one of the most difficult bosses that From Software has ever produced, but some people even hold her up as one of the most difficult challenges in gaming's history. And I can't say for sure if that's true. I know for me, she is the only boss in any game I've ever played that I haven't been able to beat. I only faced her in my first playthrough, and I rammed my head against that wall for I don't even know how long, but it was long enough for me to start enjoying the game less and less each time I got on. And I don't know if it was an issue with the build I had or my strategy, or I just wasn't good enough, but I just could not break through. Getting more and more frustrated certainly wasn't helping either, and eventually she wore me out. I just wanted to move on to the next part of the game, so I gave in. I summoned the Mimic Tier, a tool I had not resorted to using for the entire game, and she went down after 2 attempts. It was demoralizing. After facing her that many times, to have it all end with me just giving up to beat her in that way, for me, was heartbreaking. It was the only time in this game that I felt truly, utterly defeated. And in every playthrough since, I've avoided her. Not because I was afraid, I wasn't, but just because I knew how much of a challenge she was, and I didn't want to commit hours upon hours of my time to that exhausting fight again, even though I knew I had to do it at some point. In my head, it's like changing the light bulb in my bathroom. Like, I am gonna do it, I don't know, I haven't gotten around to it yet. But the truth is, I was putting it off. I knew it would be frustrating, I knew it would be painful, and I didn't want the smoke. In other words, I had forgotten that it's worth it. I had forgotten what this had felt like. But on this last playthrough, I decided to go back to the Haligtree to finish what I should have done years ago. Once again, I would not leave this ditch until I did the impossible. So here I was again, round 2, and just like before, I got absolutely annihilated. Even after hundreds of hours in the lands between and years of experience against every boss the game could throw at me, Malenia was still every bit the monster I remembered she was. The simple fact that she heals whenever she hits you means that making any mistake at all is incredibly punishing. And the fact that there's nothing else in the game that really prepares you for the flurry of moves she throws at you means that you are going to get hit. You are going to have to painstakingly relearn strategies you've spent the whole game relying on. And just when you've finally started to figure it out, guess what? New phase, new moves, full heal, wings, scarlet rot, the works. And all I could think was, again, I don't know how I'm gonna beat that. How on earth is this fair? But this time, I kept my composure.
Fuck!
I stayed calm.
Why? That's horseshit.
Okay, maybe I'm exaggerating, but I didn't quit. Every failed attempt, every half-second mistimed roll, every brutal phase 2 death, it all slowly started to click.
Oh my god!
I wasn't getting lucky, I was learning. That slow, painful, beautiful process that From Software games do better than anything else, it was happening again.
Yes!
When I landed that final hit, it was unlike anything the game had offered me up to that point. After 3 years, I'd done it. I'd finally done it. And in that moment, it wasn't even about Malenia anymore, it was about me. Because the thing that makes Elden Ring so special isn't just that it challenges you, it's that it teaches you how to rise to meet challenge. And not just in the way that the other Souls games do, but it's the fact that its open world affords you the freedom to choose. That you can walk away, to shy away, to avoid certain challenges altogether like I did. That is what makes it special. No one forced me to be here. No one asked me to do this. I chose to dig deep and muster up the will to face something that I didn't think I could. And I think there's a really valuable real-life lesson to be appreciated with that. Every fight, every failure, every hard-won victory rewrites the way you think, the way you move, the way you approach things inside and outside the game. That's why it never gets old, that's why I can't move on. Even after all this time, the game still finds new ways to humble me, to surprise me, to make me feel something real in a way that other games don't. I mean, in the moment that I beat Malenia, I put my controller down and I could feel my heart beating so hard, I felt like my ribs were rattling, I had goosebumps, my ears rang. And maybe that's what keeps me coming back. Not the rewards, not the power fantasy, but just that electric feeling of standing up one more time when you probably shouldn't have been able to, when you didn't think you could. In the end, I didn't just beat Malenia, I remembered why I fell in love with Elden Ring, and maybe why I fell in love with games in the first place. Thank you so much for watching my video to the end, and let me know in the comments what game you guys can't seem to move on from. I know that this has been a really big departure from my previous videos, but ultimately, I just want to make videos about stuff that interests me and stuff that I'm passionate about. And so I'm kind of just hoping that you guys can share in that passion regardless of what it is. Anyway, I really hope you enjoyed the video, and let me know by leaving a like or consider subscribing for more videos like this. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next one.